In December 1975, an engineer at one company built the first self-contained digital camera in the world. It was the size of a toaster. It weighed about 8 pounds. It took 23 seconds to record a single black and white image at 1/100th of a megapixel onto a cassette tape. The company that built it was the most dominant name in photography on Earth. At its height, it controlled around 90% of the film sold in the United States and about 85% of the cameras. And 37 years after one of its own engineers handed it the future, that same company filed for bankruptcy. Now here is the part everyone gets wrong. The story you have heard is that they missed digital. They did not miss it. They invented it. They knew what it would do. They spent billions on it, and they went bankrupt anyway. This is the story of why. Start in the lab in 1975. A 24-year-old electrical engineer named Steven Sasson had been handed a small, low-priority project. Take a new kind of light sensor and see if you could build a camera around it. No film, just electronics. What he built worked. You pressed the button and 23 seconds later the image was on a cassette tape. To see it, you fed the tape into a reader wired to a television set, and there it was. A photograph made of nothing but numbers. It was crude. 1/100th of a megapixel is barely an image at all. But it was the whole idea, fully formed decades early. Sasson later described how the company reacted when he showed it around. By his own account, in an interview years afterward, the response was, quote, "That's cute, but don't tell anyone about it." Treat that as his memory of the moment, not a transcript. But the pattern it describes is real, and it repeats. Because the problem with this camera was not that it was bad. The problem was what it threatened. It was a camera that made film unnecessary, and film was the entire empire. To understand the trap, you have to understand how this company actually made money. Because it was not really in the camera business. Go back to the founder, George Eastman. In the 1880s, he took photography, which was a difficult, expensive craft, and he made it something anyone could do. In 1888, he sold a simple camera, preloaded with film, under the slogan, "You press the button, we do the rest." In 1900 came a camera that cost $1, and that dollar was the hook, because the camera was cheap on purpose. The money was in everything that came after, the film, the chemicals, the paper, the developing. Every photograph anyone took for a century ran through materials this one company sold over and over at enormous margin. This is the razor and blades model. Sell the razor cheap, own the blades. And the blades here were extraordinary. By most accounts, film carried gross margins of 70 to 80% and generated the large majority of the company's profits straight through the 1990s. They even sold the feeling. The phrase Kodak moment, a slogan from the 1980s, became the everyday words for a memory worth keeping. That is how total the dominance was. And it is exactly what made the future impossible to accept. Here is where the easy story falls apart. The easy story says the company was asleep, that it never saw digital coming. That is false, and the record is blunt about it. In 1981, 6 years after Sasson's prototype, the company's own head of market intelligence ran an internal study. According to a former executive who described it later, the study reached a clear conclusion. Digital photography would eventually replace film. And the company had roughly 10 years to get ready. 10 years. Written down, delivered to leadership in 1981. So this was never a failure to see. Senior people tracked the crossover between film and digital for years. They had the data. They had, remember, invented the technology in the first place. What they could not do was act on what they knew. And the reason is the cruelest thing in the whole story. It was not stupidity, it was arithmetic. Every year film made money. Enormous, reliable, high-margin money. Every year digital promised less money, later against unknown competitors. Asking a company that profitable to walk away from its own cash cow is like asking it to argue with gravity. And notice where both the invention and the warning came from. Inside. The camera came from their own lab. The forecast came from their own analysts. The company was not ambushed by the future. It was handed a map. by its own people, and it could not make itself follow it. Watch what they actually did, because it demolishes the myth completely. They did not ignore digital, they poured money into it. In the 1990s, under a chief executive brought in specifically to make the company digital, they invested more than $2 billion into digital imaging research. They built the sensors. In 1991, they released the first digital single-lens reflex camera, a professional body with one of their own chips inside. They filed hundreds, eventually over 1,000 digital imaging patents. Patents so fundamental that decades later the world's biggest technology companies would pay to license them. And it worked commercially for a moment. By 2005, this company was the #1 seller of digital cameras in the United States. It had overtaken Sony the year before. Around 7 million cameras in a single year. That same year, for the first time in its history, digital revenue passed traditional film revenue. Read that carefully because it looks like a triumph. The film giant had reinvented itself as a digital leader, except it wasn't a triumph. It was the trap closing, because selling more of these cameras was not saving the company, it was bleeding it. This is the heart of it, and it has nothing to do with courage or vision, it is about margins. Film was a fortress. Making it took rare, guarded chemistry that only a handful of companies on Earth could do. That is why the reported margins were 70–80%. Almost nobody could compete. A digital camera was the opposite of a fortress. It was a sensor, a processor, a lens, a battery. Off-the-shelf parts sold to anyone who would pay. A competent engineer could buy the pieces and assemble a camera. So dozens of companies did, and when anyone can build the product, the price collapses. By the early 2000s, by most estimates, this company was losing around $60 on every digital camera it sold. Its own chief executive would later call the digital camera business, quote, a crappy business. Sit with the shape of that. The film model was cheap camera, expensive blades forever. The digital model had no blades at all, no film, no chemicals, no developing. The single most profitable habit in the company's history, the recurring sale, simply vanished. They had spent a century teaching the world to buy blades. Digital was a razor that never needed one. And then, just as the company was drowning in a digital camera business that could not make money, the ground moved a second time. Because it turned out the digital camera was not the destination either. It was a stepping stone. Two things arrived almost together. The camera phone, which meant people stopped buying a separate device to take pictures at all. And photo sharing, which changed what a photograph was for. For 100 years, the point of a picture had been to hold it. To print it, frame it, paste it in an album. That is what the whole empire was built to sell. Now the point of a picture was to send it, to post it. The value moved from the print on the mantle to the image in the feed. And here is the detail that stings. This company saw that coming too. In 2001, it bought an online photo sharing service. It could have owned the way the world shared images years before the social networks existed. But it used the sharing site to try to sell more prints. It kept trying to drag every new thing back to the one thing it knew how to profit from: paper. After that, the decline was not a crash. It was a long, grinding slide, and you can watch it in the numbers. At its peak in 1997, the company was worth around $30 to $31 billion. Estimates vary, so hold it as a range. Its revenue had peaked near $16 billion in 1996. On the way down, its global share of the film market collapsed from about a quarter at the end of the 1990s to under a tenth by 2010. From 2003 on, the company tore itself apart trying to survive. It closed 13 manufacturing plants. It closed around 130 photo labs. It cut roughly 47,000 jobs. Remember what this company had been. At its height in the 1980s, it employed around 145,000 people. By the end, that was down to about 17,000. And on the 19th of January 2012, Eastman Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The filing listed about $5.1 billion in assets against $6.75 billion in debts. It borrowed $950 million just to keep the lights on while it reorganized. The company that had sold the world its memories could no longer pay its own bills. So line up who paid for it. Because a bankruptcy is really just a list of who loses and in what order. The shareholders went first. In a Chapter 11 like this, equity is last in line. And the people who had held the stock believing in a 100-year-old name were effectively wiped out. Then the retirees. And here the story takes a strange turn. The company's own United Kingdom pension plan was owed so much, around $2.8 billion, that to settle the claim it took over two of Kodak's own businesses, the consumer imaging and document scanning arms, for about $325 million. Those businesses were spun into a completely separate company, owned by the pensioners, called Kodak Alaris. And the crown jewels, the digital patents, the very inventions that started in Sesson's lab, were sold off. Around 1,100 of them went for roughly $525 million. The company had once valued that same portfolio at over $2 billion, more than it had poured into digital research in the first place. Read the order of that list. The engineers were right. The technology was real and valuable, and it survived. It was the empire that could not. The shareholders, the workers, the pensioners, they paid the bill for a machine the company itself had built and refused to ride. Now, to be fair, and this series is always fair, you have to ask the honest question. Was this fate? Was any film company doomed the second digital arrived? No. And we know that because of the one that made the other choice. Kodak's great rival was the Japanese film maker Fujifilm. It faced the exact same collapse. Global film demand fell by around 90% in a single decade. Its core business was dying just as fast. But Fujifilm asked a different question. Not how do we protect film, but what do we actually know how to do? The answer was chemistry, precision coating, materials science. So it aimed that expertise at anything but film. It used its film chemistry to make protective films for flat screens and came to dominate that market. It used its knowledge of collagen and anti-oxidation, the science of stopping photos from fading, to launch a cosmetics line. It spent billions buying its way into pharmaceuticals. By 2010, imaging was less than a sixth of Fujifilm's revenue. It didn't just survive, it grew. Same disruption, same starting point, opposite ending. The difference was never the technology. It was the willingness to let the cash cow go. So what happened to Kodak itself? It did not disappear. That is the part people miss. In September 2013, after about 20 months, it walked out of bankruptcy, smaller, stripped down, and still alive. But it came out as something almost unrecognizable. Not a consumer photography giant, a business-to-business company. Today it makes commercial printing systems, advanced materials and industrial chemicals, and it has moved into producing ingredients for pharmaceuticals. It still makes film for the movie industry and for the small, loyal revival of analog photography. The name survived. The brand survived. Even a version of the film survived, split between the shrunken Kodak and the separate pension-owned Kodak Alaris. The scale of what is left tells the story on its own. Where the company once employed around 145,000 people, today it is a few thousand. Where it was once worth over $30 billion, today it is worth well under $2. What did not survive was the empire, the 90%, the 145,000 jobs. The company that owned the way an entire species remembered itself. That is gone, and it is not coming back. What is left is a modest, specialized manufacturer wearing one of the most famous names of the 20th century. So what actually killed this company? Not blindness. They saw it in 1981, not incompetence at engineering. They invented the whole thing in 1975, not a failure to invest. They spent billions and led the US digital market. What killed it was that it was too profitable to save itself. This is the lesson, and it is bigger than cameras. A high-margin cash cow is two things at once. On the balance sheet, it is your greatest asset. In the mind of the company, it is a cage. Every quarter, the film business made the case against the future in the only language a corporation truly hears. Money now versus money maybe. Certain profit versus uncertain loss. And every quarter, for 30 years, certainty won. They could never bring themselves to trade $1 of guaranteed film profit for a dime of unproven digital revenue. So the competitors who had no film to protect, who had nothing to lose, took the dime, and then the market, and then everything. The technology was never the empire. The engineers handed the company the future twice, and both times it was real. The empire was the margin. It lived on paper, in the ledgers, in the beautiful, deadly economics of the blade. And the same profit that built it was the exact thing it could not survive giving up. That is what this series is about, not the machines, the paper,